schemes under the Millennium Sustainable Development Goals, SHG sectors, and with MFIs. She has been with Justice and Care for the last 2.5 years in fighting the problems of human trafficking in many spheres. She has recommended some pioneering initiatives in the areas of repatriation, system change, and futuristic goals. I would like to invite Shorbori Das, the chairperson of this session, to kindly come to our makeshift stage. The speakers for this session are Dr. Bulbul Dhar James, Mr. Dev Ghosh, Mr. Shotto Gopal De, Ms. Supui Liu, Mr. Shamol Shamunto, Yangma. I'm sure I pronounced it wrong, but please forgive me and please come to the stage. Dr. Bulbul Dhar James is a Commonwealth Scholar and Fulbright Fellow and is the Honorary Director of the Sarojini Naidu Center for Women's Studies. She also works as an Associate Professor in the Department of Political Science and is a coordinator of the MA Human Rights Program at the Jamia Millia Islamia Central University. Mr. Shotto Gopal De is presently associated as Head Child Protection and Advocacy in Vikramshila Education Resource Society, a national level organization working in 7 states for education and child protection. He has 30 years of experience in the development sector, out of which 25 years have been in the women and child rights and child protection areas. Ms. Supui Liu is one of the founding members of NOMI Network, a non-profit organization that creates economic opportunities for survivors and women at risk of human trafficking, and has been instrumental in the growth, development, and flourishing of the organization. During her time with NOMI Network, Supui has launched field officers, implemented program activities, supervised product development, and identified job opportunities for the women that NOMI Network seeks to empower. Mr. Shamol Shamunto is the additional SP of Bankura district in West Bengal, and I'm not too clear on this, but I think they've done a child care chain, which is a model chain. Mr. Dev Ghosh is a retired international banker, having worked in both emerging as well as OECD market in corporate and investment banking with global banks. He is heading Bangladesh operations of Justice and Care as country director and has experience in cross-border trafficking and the complex process of repatriation under the bilateral agreement. And now I will hand over to Shorbori Das to take us through the session.
My name is Sri Manso, and I'm a National Program Officer working in Ireland, Myanmar. And before I joined, now I'm working for anti-trafficking projects, mostly reintegration and of vulnerable migrants, including victims of trafficking. And before I joined IOM, I worked for the Ministry of Labor up to Deputy Director, and for 20 years. So my profession actually is mobile labor migration. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and I welcome ladies and gentlemen to this last panel session of this conference, Best Practices Models in the Anti-Human Trafficking Initiatives. At the very outset, I thank Kolkata Mary Ward, the social wing of Loreto Congregation, for giving me this opportunity to participate and share some of my opinions and experiences in this field while moderating with a panel of very illustrious national and international speakers academicians, and social development practitioners who in a short while would take us through a journey to inform us on the exemplary work that is done in this field and carried out in the different parts of the world. The theme of today's panel is at once vast and varied, and within itself it has the complex dynamics and nuances of the demographical, the political, the economic, the cultural settings, which have their own striking contrasts. Now this is primarily a point of importance to dwell upon, to understand what is the backdrop to what leads to human trafficking, which is a multifaceted problem, and therefore for civil society actors and NGOs like us, what is it that we need to muster to rise up to the occasion and counter these difficult paradoxes, which is deeply rooted in our society, with some reasonable explanations and solutions. So I'm not going to take much time, but just to contextualize the entire discussion, to leave it for the floor to take over, I would essentially be speaking on the three cardinal measurables, and I would request all the speakers to look at this, because then it helps the audience to put the whole conversation in perspective. To fathom the best practices in anti-human trafficking initiatives, which are based on the pillars that examines vulnerability, which is that addresses social exclusions, marginalization, lack of opportunities, lack of knowledge, information. There is a lot of gaps in the policies and practices that when we encounter the casework on field, we are often faced up with, and based on which, what is the urgent need that we have to counter this with creating these very, we have to design the enabling factors within the society that helps us to address these problems and the vulnerabilities with a set of actions, which we call programs. And once these programs have some kind of a significance, they have some local response and then therefore a national response. So finally, on the third measurable would be that when we have a consistent pathway of these actions and having provided a reasonable amount of success, we can then dwell upon as to what really creates an impact, and that which alleviates the challenging conditions with some stronger safety net and leaves the resilience power to the community to fight this whole menace of anti-human trafficking. So with this, I would leave it to the panel, and we are all hungry listening to them, and I will be taking this session with each one of these practitioners who in their own rights are extremely erudite in this whole sector, and we will structure this session because we have a time limit that we have to wrap up the whole thing for a closing ceremony by 3 o'clock. So kindly restrict your discussions to 10 minutes, and then maybe we leave another 2-3 minutes to invite questions from the audience, and then finally go to the next, because it will be difficult for you to remember all the 6 speakers and then jot down your questions. Does it work? Does it okay? So we will be having at the max of 10 minutes. I would request each of the speakers to please honor the timeline, and then we will. So whichever works for the audience, because you're as much as a part as we are on this side. So please suggest, you can stop and you can take the questions. And now over to the panelists now to speak. I'll request Bulbul Chaudhary to start with the presentation, because she has a flight to catch, and therefore she should be more interested to take the questions as fast as possible. So we will ask her to take us through the journey as to what she feels about the best model practices for anti-human trafficking initiatives.
I'll cut on the formalities because Shabani's already thanked everybody here, Monica and Neelanjana and everybody as part of the group. And at the outset, say that I'm very daunted with the panelists who are here, including our moderator, our chairperson, because this is really not my area. So I'd really like to put it in macro perspective of violence and socio-cultural context to why trafficking happens, and hence the kind of measures we need to take. So I'm open to question and open to suggestions. as anything else. So I will gloss over some of the slides because I don't think we need in depth into it. But I would like to see it in the context of the larger context of why it is part of the larger picture of violence and how it fits in the push factor. The pull factor is, there's a political economy to it, which we will deal with, but what is the push factor, which kind of triggers off trafficking? And understanding trafficking, and a lot has been said on this, so I don't really need to go into it majorly, but it's recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, obtaining of a person for purposes of forced labor, services through means of forced, fraud, or coercion. So forced, fraud, coercion, so choices are not real choices which are being made. And sex trafficking, when a commercial sex act is induced by, again, force, fraud, coercion, or when a person is induced to perform such acts under the age of 18. A lot of the stuff is already being covered, so we will not get into it. It involves violence is what I'm concerned with, and severe form of violence which impacts the victims, and I think the perpetuators in ways in which they get desensitized to the issue. And I think the best practices will involve a sensitization on both these quarters along the larger picture, and this came up with Flavia's inaugural address, and later on also in yesterday's climate change session which I attended. Issues of concern here are how desensitized we are and how preparedness needs to be there on that quarter. So strategy to counter, and I've called it HT now, human trafficking, needs to be adaptable and flexible to thwart any adaptable and flexible criminal, because we need to think like the criminal to be able to counter the criminal. And that's something which we need to work on, a strategy which needs to be, of course, collaborative, needs a strong understanding of the community served, because if we don't know what is the dimension that we are looking at, what are the parameters, we're not going to be able to break in at all. The dynamics are tremendous, and it is dynamic, it's constantly changing. Understanding, and to me, as my area is political economy, I think there's a political economy to this, to human trafficking in myriad perspectives, and that needs to be looked at. There is a cost-benefit analysis that needs to be made in terms of what are the costs, who's paying, and the benefits obviously outweigh the costs, perhaps for the perpetuators as well as the victims on both quarters. And that is something we need to break in if we want to stop it, as a strategy. Victim service providers bring a diversity of specialized services, and here we need to have collaborative effort because it can't work it has to be a multi-pronged approach. So specialized diversity of services, specialized service skills, social resources, interpersonal and intercultural relationship skills, because it has to be from within the community, which will create inroads to build bridges with the victims and communities for law enforcement partners through their partnerships and connections with vulnerable populations and people who are difficult for law enforcement to access. Having said that, I have very little faith in law being a solution. It is like a bargaining chip more than being a solution in any which way. So we need to work around it, but use that bargaining chip to be able to access or reach out at least as a threat, as an impending threat for perpetuators. Service providers, CSOs, NGOs, social service agencies, all of which need to collaboratively work on the issue, which is not an issue, it's of concern because it's from within us this is happening. And legal service providers, immigrant advocacy groups, and government law enforcement agencies, associations, medical professionals, it's a health, a whole lot of mental health issue, other issues, academicians who are working on it, so that we put forth data. Now, data is not useful when we look at the reality of the situation, but it's useful to make that change in the policy. So have that in hand so that we can introduce that, to have that sensitized knowledge to be able to make that change and introduce that in the policy, because unless we have numbers there, policy at the government level, international level also doesn't change. Social and legal service agencies, youth shelters, special service providers, all of which are part of this larger picture. It has to be realistic an achievable modus operandi. We can't be ambitious on this to say we're going to do it in one go. So an informal kind of an MOU and or a formal MOU of some sort, we have to take a call on that, because sometimes the formality can be very daunting for agencies which are trying to help or come forth. Sometimes the informality can lead to a lot of flexibility which might well be counterproductive, but we need to look at that. It has to be on a one-to-one basis. The operational protocols, training documents, resource directories, general and investigative guidelines for responding to incidents, procedures need to be streamlined. I mean, it has to be there in hand. Meetings for relationship building, training, mutual exchange of ideas, problem solving and innovation. It has to be collaborative in a way. We have to celebrate success as well. And each little success, it's important because that's which is going to push us forth in the next change that can happen, that should happen. So data collection and analysis, I already said, it's dynamic, it needs to be brought forth. It's multidisciplinary coalition, partnership and collaboration, comprehensive and victim-centered response to human trafficking. It has to be, the victim blame game, which very often happens, needs to be, resisted. Culturally sensitive one has to be, and linguistically connected, because here you have dialects, you have languages, you have the trauma can't be understood unless you reach out in ways in which it's from within the community. So an outsider can only do so much unless that connection is there. Subjects of trauma, emotional bonding, climate of fear, and other circumstances need to be countered. So dissemination of information and public awareness is... Sorry, get this one. Okay. So I think a lot of these will be dealt with because I'm not dealing with best practices. I'm not the best person to deal with it. But I'd like to emphasize the intersectionality and the outreach angle of human security concerns. And this needs to be something which has to have support from within and without the larger picture. I'll just gloss over this. Academically intersectional approaches have three axes, which is race, gender, and class. But when we are looking at human security, we are looking at a whole lot of other practices within that. And these are, I'd like to specify, culturally and socially specific. These are, culture and society decides the space and boundaries in which we operate as men, women, transgender, and that's an issue which hasn't come up till now as trans people. And that also needs to be looked at within the trafficking issue. It's something which has been completely ignored. Space and boundaries are provided by culture and society. Code of conducts and role we play as men, women, trans people in society is also very specific. So each society, each sub-society, each culture, each tribe, it's going to be different. Challenges and opportunities for societies to unfold in new directions are constantly emerging. I don't want to get into the gender-sex dichotomy, which is fairly central to this issue because I want to look at how it's genderized the whole debate and the roles that gender and sex play in that. And there's no problem with the sex part of it. It is the genderization that which is problematic, which leads to a kind of a patriarchal control if we focus on women, control over her body, her mobility, her wealth and property, her health, her education, employment, the push factors for trafficking. It's not an isolated instance. It has to be seen from the larger perspective. Patriarchy, which is a social organization in which man heads and controls the family unit. It's not male control, but it's the male values which have to be challenged. Male values which are very often perpetuated by women more than men. So I want to emphasize, because very often it's like male domination. It's not male domination as much as male value domination, which male and female are both subject to. So patriarchy could be equally exploitative of men and boys. Having said that, it gives in the stereotypes in which we are looking at gender, and these kind of values influence women in terms of other factors which we just mentioned. But participation in decision making, we don't have enough women in decision making bodies, so policies get skewed. To me, the most important of all this is it affects the autonomy and self-esteem of women. They start not having faith in themselves. So it is the larger picture is gender. which we are looking at in terms of boundaries, but gender difference is not the problem. The problem is gender inequality. And that inequality is a part of the push factor which puts women into disadvantageous positions, which is socialized in the form of what I call the gender box, where the 4 walls are behavior, roles, relationship, and self. These are socially determined. This needs to be looked at from the larger perspective of patriarchy, where families get gendered, work is gendered. You know, who does what role? Work is certainly gendered. Political systems are gendered. For the first time, we have a defense minister who's a woman, but otherwise, you have soft portfolios which are given to women, and vice versa. Physically, public spaces are male, private spaces are female, kitchens and other areas. So the larger context, despite all winding up, despite all the kind of constitutional provisions that are there, legal provisions that are there, still we have existence of so many issues. All the laws that are there, for instance, for women, your fundamental duties, which really don't get honored. My primary discipline is political science, so in terms of directive principles which the state needs to follow, or state policy, again, it's not really honored. So you could have any number of acts which are forever growing, and the bill for trafficking is still in place. It really is something which needs to be looked at in terms of a strategy to combat this kind of, consistency of crimes being committed. So 3 A's of awareness, action, and aftercare need to be looked at. And we need to connect those dots. Crisis, it could be any kind of crisis or disaster, climate change, etc., domestic violence, hunger, dignity, all these connected to human security. We need to connect those dots and look at the political economy of choices that are there. And trafficking is a choice which is being made by a victim. And this is something which has to be from within the larger governance structures, which are not able to deal with this issue. So violence, which is not simply a physical or a biological act, but located in the social and cultural context. I'd like to look at that from the larger perspective. Thank you all.
So, thank you so much, Bulbul Di. I think her deliberation should have been right at the beginning of the conference, because she's kind of painted a very broad vista as to what are the very multi-pronged ways of looking at anti-human trafficking initiatives, right from the commercial aspect, from the intelligence of the perpetrators, because once we are not addressing that, we will be only countering it, but we really need to go a little deep to understand what are the entrenches. Thank you so much, because you've painted a very, very broad and an academic sky as to which we can actually deal with. I will now request Shukta Gopal De to, do you have a presentation?
Yeah.
Okay, so I will ask Shukta Gopal De to take us through the best practices model, requesting you to just put it for the topic, which is the best initiatives that we can take and people can take some lessons from here.
My everyday is a day of learning. I do not know how I am competent to teach you lessons. So whatever I have gathered during my tenure in the development sector, I will try to highlight some of this aspect, and it is not of my own. It is there available in many domains. I will just try my best to raise certain questions. When we are talking about best practices, what is best practices actually? So I have developed a presentation. I thought preliminary that I will speak in extempo. Then finally, if it is a PowerPoint in front of you, so you are confident and more powerful. So it is there in front of you, so I will try to highlight those aspects. Best practices, I have tried to introduce certain questions. It is not possible to define best practices through a single lens. Best practices could be defined through legal remedies, national and international instruments, through rescue, repatriation, restoration, what is best practices all about, rehabilitative, dealing with victim, dealing with accused. So this is so complex issue. This is to be dealt with multi-pronged approach and multi-stakeholder engagement procedure. So I have raised certain questions. Identification of victim include a lot of areas as being, I am not going to repeat it. It is there. Legal remedies. Law many a times in our country particularly, even the international protocol and convention, there are no dearth of legal remedies. Maybe there are lacunae. But the need of the hour is to interpret the law into the context, according to the context and situation. Whether that is happening while dealing with the issue of best practices need to be kept in mind. Victim assistance and victim cooperation, victim dealing with victim. Some overview I have tried to portray in India. Constitutional safeguard has already been told by my previous speaker, so I am not going to repeat it. Strategy to tackle trafficking, when we are talking about best practices, it has to be deal with root causes, enforcement assistance, empowering victims, human rights based approach, all these rescue, rehabilitation, reintegration in the society. As I have stated that there is no doubt of Indian national legal framework. Criminal law amendment, I have a police friend in front of me and he will highlight more on the recent 2013 amendment has added different dimension into the existing act, which is Immoral Prevention and Trafficking Act 1956, and it was amended in 1986. It is not very holistic regulation to deal with the issue of trafficking, and our new legislation is pending in the parliament, is not yet been passed, and even we have gone through the bill, that bill is also not very holistic. Indian Penal Code, there are select provisions. Child Labor Prohibition Act, it is not 1986, it is now 2015. Juvenile Justice Care and Protection Act 2015 and Prohibition of Child Marriage Act 2006 and Protection of Children from Sexual Offence Act. There are commission and statute. National Commission for Women is there, National Commission for Human Rights is there, National Commission for Protection of Child Rights. I think the chairperson of State Child Commission was present yesterday, and National Commission for Safeguards and Child Rights. These are constitutional, statute and ombudsman are there to deal with these two. And international convention from Palmer Protocol to a lot of, convention on the right of the child 1989 and being ratified in 1992 by Government of India, CEDAW, all these are there. The role of central government being there, it is available in the website, and certain things are happening, if not in very holistic manner, but things are happening in piecemeal. And policies. Before taking you to the actual examples of best practices, I am just trying to that if one is willing, so within the existing framework and mechanism, certain dynamism of best practices could be garnered, and it is possible. We know life is not tune of an orchestra, but life is not always negative. We have heard the story of, I think the name of that sister is Sandra, no? And what an encouraging story. I could not control my tears yesterday. It is possible. There are institutional mechanisms, but what is absence is interlinked coordination, appropriate investigation, rescue and rehabilitation, judicial support, cooperation and training. Now coming to some few best practices model in the state of West Bengal, where Kundasri, a flagship program of Government of West Bengal, and there is a provision which is called sponsorship within the ambit of integrated child protection scheme. While highlighting you to the certain examples of best practices, I will try to highlight the percentage of budget allocated for children in our country. We are talking about best practices. Now, answer is with you. Now, Kanyasri is one of the flagship program. I think altogether about 40,69,325 children were being benefited out of this, where early marriage will be prevented. And Kanyasri has got many national and international awards. And it has got recognition at the national level as well as in the international level. Certain examples are there where community-based resource team, Diksha is one of the NGO in Calcutta. I can vouch because in my earlier organization I worked closely with Diksha in one of the brothel, not Sonagachi, is one of the brothel in Calcutta where there is no second generation prostitution. And it is possible of the second generation boys and girls, and the mechanism in community-based resource team. Sanja Chula I have witnessed, where children in urban difficult circumstances, mostly on the move and railway platform, where Prajok, one of the organization, created kind of a dynamism. These children used to live with the porters community of the railway platform, staying with there, and they were protected. In my present organization, Bikram Select Education Resources, where is active citizenship, where greater deal of cyber safety being taught. So, and Novel Disha is one of the prime initiative, community policing initiative of Calcutta Police, where if you have time, you can approach the Honorable Commissioner of Police. We are associated with them since 18 years. A lot of examples are there. Now, in the state of West Bengal, I feel proud that there is a separate directorate within the Department of Women and Child Development and Social Welfare. This directorate is called Directorate of Child Right and Trafficking. I do not know whether any of the state has this type of dedicated directorate, but West Bengal government has a dedicated. The task force, as per Supreme Court directives, task force to be, but in all across country, only Maharashtra and West Bengal has task force. And task force has restored about 430 children intrastate and 430 cross-border and 459 interstate restoration and repatriation. Science Siddha is a scheme of Government of West Bengal where attempt being made to rehabilitate the survivor and the victim in the sex trade. Mukti Ralo, the rays of hope, is also a kind of rehabilitative program for the survivor, and the village level child protection committee and world level child protection committees being notified all across the state. Maybe all are not functioning in a proper manner, but they are being formed and government is taking initiative to strengthen those.
If I may just break in once more, are you going to be over in a minute?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
So I have only 3-4 slides. Best practice. My question is it a myth? Is it a reality? Is it a dream? Where is the budget? Look at our central government budget. Last 15 years, budgetary allocation for children remained stagnant in Union Budget 2017-18, with government allocating just 3.32% to children. Now you see this graph. 2013-14, it was 4.56% of the total budget. In 14-15, it was 4.52 and 3.32. But within this hope is integrated child protection scheme. Integrated child protection scheme where Government of India raised more money. It was 400 crores last year. It is 600 crore now. Now we have waste and things are happening. We criticize government, but my association with government for 30 years being in the NGO sector, earlier as a journalist, I have seen there are good people in the government, and if you can identify those proponents, and things can happen. And my last last slide, global distribution of military expenditure in 2002. A food for thought. 39% of the budget is for military for United States. So where is the social welfare budget for our children, for women, for the vulnerable community? And with this note, I conclude, and question is welcome.
Thank you so much, Shotto. Shotto Gopal has actually brought in a completely different dimension. One of the best practices is also for the advocacy of better accessing of the policies and framework. We have the framework and the policies and the legislations right in place, but there is, unfortunately, on the field, a lot of gaps between the one who want to access these services and for the demand with which one reaches out. So he's brought in a very, very crucial point, because one of the best practices would be from the different parts of the world is also for making public advocacy, for making the policies much more accessible, much more reachable to whom it is actually meant for. So, and of course, just for the mention of the rest of the audience, Konyashri is the conditional cash transfer program, which has been the flagship program on the UN and the global platform, which is tremendously able to reduce the age of child marriage, and it has a spiraling effect in addressing the infant mortality, the maternal mortality, the other aspects of the nutritional demands. So it's been a very spiraling and a spin-off kind of a program. And of course the West Bengal Task Force. West Bengal is supposed to be the only state today who has also done a state plan of action, not for children. We have been pioneers to doing the state plan of action for children, which the national has finally adopted, but then we've done, because it's one of the source states, the border state with Bangladesh, the government has actually brought out a document which is called the State Plan of Action to Fighting Human Trafficking. So that's been one of the best practices of the government and the deep commitment. So with this, I will request Sue Pei from Naomi Network to share if she's got a good model, and if she could make what are the exemplary things that we can also adopt, because that's the whole idea of the session, what to make it more feasible.
Before I start, I know this has been a lot of information. I don't know about you guys, but it's a lot of information for me. So I'm going to ask you for 5 seconds, indulge me. Everybody stand up, please. Come on, 5 seconds. And then I'd like you to turn to the next person and shake their hand, say, you are not doing this by yourself. You are not doing this by yourself. All right. Okay, so now everybody sit down. Thank you. Thank you for giving me that indulgence and kind of hopefully get your blood pumping a little bit. So there are actually simple 3 parts I'm going to share a little bit. The first part is sort of how I actually came about, because unlike many of the panelists here, I don't have over 2 decades of experience. I actually only learned about the trafficking issue in 2008. So because prior to that, I was actually in private sector. I was in the fashion industry, so I was in the buying office. I was crunching the number, and I was making sure I have plenty of profit on my end for my company that I can get a good review. And I also work on the manufacturing side as a result, because seeing the production, which of course is a part of the selling process and the bigger chain of the whole entire supply chain issue. Okay, so 2008, I actually learned about the issue with one of my co-founders who's sitting here, and I was like, oh, what can I really do? So we actually did many interviews with anti-human trafficking organization in Cambodia, and part of the challenge we actually learned is reintegration. So after you help these ladies, what next? Many of them end up going back, quite honestly, because what? So what a lot of organizations start doing, they actually start creating what they call the social model, the business, the livelihood, which you often hear about today. So started 2009, we kind of set on a mission, what if we can create a training or program model that was an end goal in mind of getting the job at the end. And let's be a little bolder, let's go even farther before the chain is, can we actually prevent this from happening in the first place? So this is where kind of Know Me model comes created, because we really focus on economical empowerment and job creation. So what I'm going to share with you a little bit about our journey is best practice is because we face similar challenges, and we hear from many NGOs who try to create similar model and face the challenges. And one is we just can't do it at all. I think it's so important for us to focus on each one of our core competency and then really learn and then adopt the best practice from our partner organizations. And I think what I have really learned from the last 2 decades is, NGOs are coming together. This is fantastic, right? The public sectors are coming together. We are talking. It's no more my victim, your victim, my client, your client, but it's great. So in the last decade, I'm hearing the conversation extended to government. Fantastic. Policies are making, changes are happening, right? Police are being trained, regulations are in place. But what I have not heard much is how about the private sectors? This is exciting because this is what we start hearing in the developed country, because this is the issue in USA, in European countries, as some of you heard today. And it's also, guess what? It's an issue in Southeast Asia, of course. And I'm starting to hear people really talking about working together in private sectors. So last week I was actually in another anti-human trafficking conference in Bangkok and focused on Southeast Asia. And one of the presenters is actually one of the largest fresh seafood supplier in the world. So the latest challenge around the globe in that region is fisherman issue. So there is a lot of forced bondage labor actually on the fishing boat. Just imagine all the seafood you are eating. You have no idea where it's coming from, right? But the exciting part is because a lot of CSR initiatives from the private sector, as well as the consumer demand, the private sectors are actually taking action. But the truth is, they don't know where to go. They don't know how to start. So who do they go to talk to? Public sector, NGOs. And this is where all our hard work finally can be in place. We start talking to them, all right? And then the other exciting news, and this is actually a learning experience for me, is actually from the financial industry. We hear about, oh my goodness, human trafficking is a global issue. Global issue, how much money is generated, and so on and so forth. But have you ever thought about, if it's a global issue, how is the money going around the world, supplying them? Think about that. So, this large financial institute have the financial data transaction of over 70 banks, 70% of the banks in the world, 70%, right? So now they actually start tracking the activity that is suspicious. Initially it started from counterterrorism, but now it's moving towards the trafficking. And that's really exciting, because imagine if the large criminal's asset can be frozen, can be under investigation, we're cutting to the core. So don't do this by yourself. Listen and learn from what other industry is doing. And then second, it is a process. The reason I'm saying the process is we start our training in Forbishgang, which is really a community base. Of course, we learn it's never just one issue. But one thing we realized is because a lot of trafficking, the source is actually where the rural setting is. I mean, this is especially true not just in India, in many underdeveloped countries. So you got to work with the community. And second is, and then the second pathway is basically after community, how do you create job? So then you have to focus then, the next step is job creation. And then what we call the work development. And this is really exciting because with the whole India initiative, the skill building, and this is the perfect vehicle that we can partner with all different technical training school and the private sector who are doing this. And then third process is really leadership capacity building, because once you get to a certain level, and the truth of the matter is, all of us are sitting here, you have addressed, you work in this issue, and it can be quite honestly very exhausting. So when I'm talking about leadership, it's not just talking about survivor, but also at the organization level. And then one last closing point is celebrate the small success. And I think this is especially true, not only from the clients, but as well as even from our partner, especially private sector partner, because imagine the supply chain, what a huge issue it is. So, and then for example, in Cambodia, we actually work with, in India, we have our own training center, but in Cambodia, we work with 40 different social enterprise, which means they start as an NGO and then they move on to creating jobs. So many of them work extremely hard because they don't come from a business sector background. So how do they know what the buyers at the global scale are looking for? So we equip them. We build their capacity up so they feel strong. They feel like they know how to communicate with the buyer at a global level. So, and then I just want to make a final point, kind of go back, talk about the importance of private sectors, a partnership. With the social enterprise we have worked with, the really good ones, they can probably employ roughly about 150 and 200 people. But we are now start tapping into partnership with the private sectors. And the manufacturers here, even in India, they can employ over 100,000. Just imagine if we just have 1% of that, how much more can we create? So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Supay. That was fantastic because it's inevitable that among the civil society actors, the corporates can't be staying out because more and more we are trying to make the community economically resilient. It is there that we have to actually add into the value chain. And I think one of those best practices I was reading about was that there has been a lot of regulations and a lot of fair trade which is going on in Massachusetts, and then how to deal with the good governance, how to deal with the employees, and how to deal with to see that in the entire good practices that how managing the brokers and the local the laborers are taken into consideration. Thank you so much. Would you have any questions for Supay? Because she's really put in a very revolutionary kind of a model and what they are doing in Cambodia, because Cambodia is actually struggling a lot with all these issues. And I know there's Japan, which is reaching out to Cambodia for the second generation, and they also have a conditional cash transfer for these girls to keep them into school and then avoid them the second generation of prostitution. So would you have any questions for Supay? Then we go to the next. Okay, so may I request Mr. Shamunto now to please tell us about the child care model, which is one of his best practices that he has initiated, and he was very interested that he shared it with the larger public.
Actually, this is not a best practice model, but this is the practice which are being continued here, even after my transfer from Bosiat. When I was as an SDPO at Bosiat, then we started this model. So our target area is Bosihat. You all know this is a totally unfenced area between Bangladesh and border. There are about 200 kilometers. The river and border and land border are there. And there is one PS, that is Fundaskali. The interesting thing is, after Aila, there is a natural disaster that occurred in 2010. After a while, the rate of trafficking, especially girl child trafficking, was increased. But in the tribal society, no record of girl child trafficking or kidnapping was recorded in PS, or there is no database regarding this issue. So that is a very interesting thing, and we thought that it was possible, and we also collect some opinion from this society, the Majis, the leaders of tribal society, and they stated that it was possible because a bunch of monetary system operating in such a way that child grow up with their values, ethics, morals, etc. But that is the difference. Okay. Now our model, the name is Loho Manavi, and our target is, or our goal of this model is restricting cultural trafficking, women empowerment, to restrain the early marriage, to monitor the child who remains on par in their growing stage, and not keeping peace with the socially sanctioned norms in the domain where he is growing up. And our target group is two. One is the vulnerable child, those who are vulnerable for trafficking, and also those child who may be the cause in future for trafficking. Next. And this is our logo. This is actually a part of community policing. We have started in the banner of our district police administration, that is North Western District Police. And here, please. Here, I just want to make you understand that what is the position of Loho Manavi, and what is the position of Manavi Granthagara, and what is the position of society. So, cell, it is controlled by nucleus, and with several cells, human body form. Likewise, Loho Manavi, the institutional form of now Loho Manavi is Manavi Granthagara. That is a library. Our main target is not to constitute a library, not to set up a library, but this is the institutional form of this project. Next. As we are the part of police, so basically our strategy is builds fundamental policing practice with an emphasis on controlling trafficking and lasting solution to the problems. Next. So, Loho Manavi, it starts from Manavi Granthagara. All members here will be the female person. The key persons are those female persons who are accepting, who have some acceptance attitude, who are not at all a denial attitude. Next. Here, all lady personnel will avail the facilities, but men are not allowed, even not the boys also. By such simulation, a message will go to the families towards the society will think of it that women have the direct accessibility to the police administration. Next. And when we are going to set up this model, we are approaching first to the VEC, that is the Village Education Committee. It is a part of Panchayat Raj system in our Bengal. We are making them convinced that you please go ahead. And after the part complete, after the convincing part is completed, they are approaching to video, local videos or SI of school, that with a request that you please give or you please share one school or one room of school for setup of this library in a remote village or that target area which is very much infested area in terms of human trafficking. Their electric or fans of that library will be provided by school. Book and computer, this is 100% donation. And we are putting our appeal that you please, all the female persons, you please give at least one book. It may be a value of rupees 1 only. You please give one book to this library so that you can feel that this is your library. This is not the library which is found by police or which is constituted by police. Like you have to think that this is your library. So that's why we are requesting them, please give at least one book. Yes. And the component of this library is study books first, not story book first. First is study book, then story book, then books for competitive exams or daily newspapers, and of course the computer. And this computer will also act as an information kiosk in that area. So in such a whatever I have said earlier, just such a simulation, those child, see, he or she can feel, sense, recognize, experience, and make out that his or her mother is not only a working lady of their family, he or she is getting the preference of the government administration, that is the help of police, which her father or other male members can't. And he is getting all such facilities because of her mother being a female member and has the direct accessibility to such excellent unit of police administration. Yes. This is our livelihood. Yes. Yes. Exhaust stamp. Yes. So here I am just one thing I just want to make you I just put that is if we consider this clock as a low homology, that is the main function is organ or main function is machine. So there should be some keys, and here keys are in terms of education program, health program, livelihood program, sports, others. And our main target is to create the consciousness among the society. Next. So in terms of health programs, their key activities are awareness camp for thalassemia, they are continuing, blood grouping, blood donors directory, treatment for epidemiology, among childs, girl childs, diet chart for FE deficiency, health care card for girl child, health camp for senior citizen, health camp for common villagers also. Next. In terms of education program, there are some key activities. Yes, a government grant or scholarship to the student who deserve, that is scholarship. Quiz competition, training on library person by girls, information kiosks, tutorials for the student of girl child. There is one interesting thing, that is selection of vulnerable child who have to send to the system of mass education school. Why mass education school? Because mass education school is a body where that child, he can get food, he can get education, he can get book, he can get clothes, he can get security up to 18 years. Sorry, C. Yes, in mass education school there is he and she also. Yes, and the irony of it is that I worked at Bosirat. There is one mass education school at Banipur. The total capacity is 1,000. There is 4 units, 1,000 capacity is there, but only 150 boys are there. So that is the actual scenario. Next. Yes. No. Next. There is also another key activities regarding other activities awareness program also. Next. So this is the model where the health program, education program, livelihood program, sports and others, these are the key activities which supports Manavi Granthagar to develop Manavi, low Manavi groups. That is a part of Manavi empowerment. Next. And when this low Manavi groups is developed, it will take the help of pupils representative and it will find out the vulnerable child or CNCP or other child, and they will just try to send them at mass education school. So that will be their consciousness part. Next. This is the whole model. Next. Already I have discussed. Next. Next. So we have tried to set up around 10 Manavi concerts there, but as of now, T3 has been completed. We are in process. Next. Next. So all these are some activities there at Bosirat, at Sondeskali also. This is his Koshi Sondeskali. It is the picture of Purva Polimari, that is a part of adjacent part of Assam. Next, this is joint video. Next. This is the area of Hemnagar, that is the last part of our habitat. Just at the lap of the Sundarban. Yes. Long we are organizing some workshop also for distressed children. Next. Yes. They are also organizing some health camp. Yes. So this is, we also sent a letter to our Honorable President of India. He also sent this project to the Ministry of Women and Child. So that was my model. This is not the best, but this is a practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shamanto, and it's great to see that how the police is taking active initiatives and putting women empowerment in their own programs. We already have one in West Bengal which is called the Shoyam Shiddha, which is also in South Chobbish Pargona, and it is addressing all the vulnerable children and as well as the adolescent girls in the school in trying to detect the early signs of trafficking and giving them all the awareness so that they can stand up against it. I just wanted to ask you that women themselves are already pretty strong, but why do you have to name them Loho Manavi? It means Iron Lady. Because the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world, as it goes for women. So why did you have to make her hands iron?
Actually, when we started this program, that was the program of women empowerment. That's why we put this name, Logo One.
So,
after that, we will develop this for child care. We are developing a model, that is child care unit, child care chair. And this is a part of that model. That model has not been completed.
maybe you can think about a different name at a later stage. So what I wanted to ask was that, Loho Manavi means like it's an iron lady. I think we can leave it for the stage to decide because I'm sure women have more compassionate nature than always being so iron. So I also wanted to ask, you have several set of programs that you have actually focused for this Loho Manavi. So are you having NGOs tied up to do these in terms of giving health and all the iron deficiency and all of that? And also because you've created a Gronthagar, which means a library. So would you also be running the adult literacy program? Because many of the women may not be, they may be illiterate in the first place.
Well, madam, we are also focusing on that part because already I have said in my presentation that all members should be female. Boys, they can avail the book, but their mothers or their grandmothers, they have to become member of the library. So that they can feel that they are having this book for their mothers or for their grandmothers.
I get that, but how is it that they will be availing it? But how do you make that they access the book by reading it? It's not about just taking a product back home and making them feel, in a way, a little more desperate that I don't even know how to hold the book, whether it's the right side or the wrong side, because they've probably been illiterate. So are you running an adult literacy program along with this also?
Yes, ma'am, that's a good suggestion. We will also incorporate, but our target is here child. The target is child. That's why, but this is a good suggestion.
Yes, because I think if you're taking it for the former generations, they may not be adequately exposed to reading the book. So it would be a good way if you could look into seeing if they can be also getting some kind of a relationship to, accessing the book in a certain way. Because you've named it Gronthagar, it's library. So instead of making them inspirational, they should not be feeling sad that they're not being able to read the book. Yeah. So I leave it to the stage to ask the questions. I've asked most of the questions.
Actually, sir, I was there, but now I have been transferred at Bankura district. So you please come to Bankura district. I can assist you all around.
So you may contact me.
Of course.
We can provide a mobile library service as per your requirement of your area, requirement of children, requirement of adult people.
Thank you.
So it is possible that twice a month or once a month.
Okay, I will contact you later.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we will come back to questions again. Let's finish the presentations because we have 2 more speakers and we are running fast on time. And now I request Mr. Dev Ghosh, the country director And it became an obvious choice because he's on the other side of the border in Bangladesh as a country director, and he's just spoken about Boshihat, which happens to be the longest border along with Ichamoti Nodi. So, Mr. Ghosh, if you could just illuminate in terms of what are the best practices that Bangladesh government is doing. Thank you.
I think I'll focus specifically on the Bangladesh side because there's been a lot of experience and expertise on this side of the border. And the Indo-Bangladesh border is the fifth largest in terms of, fifth longest actually, boundary between, and it's very, and it's set with riverine and all kinds of terrain, and it's very difficult. And particularly in the southwest section is from the Bangladesh side, I'm saying southwest, and from the Indian side it will be obviously southeast. It's very porous, and mainly because, and that is where the trafficking is prolific. The 4 districts in Bangladesh which are connected to the Khulna division have the highest level of victims in terms who are sex trafficked or who are trafficked out. And that's Joshore, Shatkhira, Norail, and Khulna. And we struggle with this a lot. So when Justice and Care decided internationally to open an office in Bangladesh, one of the persuasions behind this concept was to have offices on both sides of the border. The first challenge which I remember seeing was the repatriation process, because there's a physical part and there's a paperwork part. And believe you me, the paperwork for the repatriation process has been very, very challenging. So much so that when I used to visit the shelter homes, I used to see victims languishing for 30 months, 3 years, 4 years. And some of them have lost their childhood, some of them have lost their teens, and it's really very, very frustrating actually. So if you talk about best practices, I would imagine most NGOs would obviously have to work on a coordinated basis. And if you have offices on either side of the border, it obviously helps in moving the repatriation process more efficiently and more effectively. And that's what we have seen, like ever since we started formal office operations in Dhaka, and now we have an office in Jessore also. We've done more than 130 repatriations compared to say 20 or 25 a year which we used to do before. That is because we are able to move the paperwork through the Bangladesh process, the verifications, the repatriation orders and things like that. But even then, even after moving the paper, you still have blockages on this side or in the process itself, and that's a challenge. The other issue is, which I faced in my just 2 years of experience in the sector, is that having done all this work and repatriating the victims after, on an average of 18 months or 20 months stay in the shelter homes, because the fact that the victims go back to a setup, to their original setup in the villages, which is where they cannot adapt again, there's a high element of incidence of re-trafficking. And the re-trafficking element is something like, incidence is almost like 40 to 50% in fact. And what is very, very interesting is something which I would pick up on what Madam Sue Pei said about social enterprise and the working. The trafficking sector has actually moved away from the rural sector because there has been some awareness, a certain amount of enlightenment at the community level. But so these victims who after getting repatriated go back to the rural areas, they then migrate to Dhaka or to the industrial towns and for a living because they're not used to, they cannot adapt back into the village society. There's also the element of stigma, there's there are many compulsions, the reason why they choose a different locale for their new life. And therefore, what we have seen is that particularly most of these girls whom we have repatriated over the years, they are well endowed with sewing and knitting and stitching skills, and they can easily find a job in the garments industry. But that is exactly the sector where the re-trafficking incidence is now the highest actually, and it's amazing So the traffickers, of course, keep moving their business model, and the garments industry again is very well protected. It's very performing. And what is very heartrending is that these women who work in the garment sector, who are given a job because of their skills, and it's easy for us as NGOs to place them there, they drop out very, very soon, in fact. I mean, I'm not saying in 2-3 months' time, but there's a high rate of dropout, and that is what causes the re-trafficking process, in fact. So when you talk about social enterprises, Madam Sweeney, in fact, the problem is that the industry, garments industry is the most, Bangladesh garments industry is the most performing industry. It's the second largest exporter of garments and textiles, next to China. It's got a $34 billion, exports, but they're very, very protective of their sector. And when we as NGOs or international organizations go in and try to create awareness and advocacy at the shop floor levels to prevent trafficking, so that these traffickers who are there in the sector, in the garments industry or in the shop floor are resisted properly, we find it's not easy, because there's a vested interest, and their basic agenda is to serve the orders of the buyers. They're looking at as long as they can fulfill some of the criteria of the buyers lobby, the American lobby and the European lobby, they are home and dry. And that's very, very challenging, because we wanted to set up we were looking at social enterprises similar to what you were talking about, and that's where things have not failed, because the garments industry is so protective. They even they regarded a social enterprise being set up for garments as a predator to or a competitor to their own industry. And that was really surprising, actually. So I'm just talking about the best practices. I would say that we've come a long way between the two countries. The relationship between the border security forces on the other side of the border has changed hugely, and on the eastern side, it's very, very amiable. It's a healthy relationship between the BGB and the BSF over the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years. Very different, and in contrast, stark contrast to what the border relationships are on the western side of India. And so that's been a big thing. There's also been a MOU which has been an understanding between the two governments on trafficking, and there's a task forces have been set up on either side of the border. There's one task force in Bangladesh, there's a couple of task forces in Maharashtra and in West Bengal, and we're trying to set up a platform where they can talk to each other so that the repatriation process becomes more efficient and more effective. The final thing is that creating awareness has been done by NGOs and by communities in a variety of ways. And I think what works best is being very creative, in fact. And I'll just take a little page from the company called, NGO called Girl Effect. And they did a wonderful job in a country like Ethiopia, where they used the FM channel as the medium to create awareness at with the girls and women in the age group of 16 to 20. And that created a lot of awareness in terms of early marriage, and things have been very successful. There's an FM channel like that in place in Norel, which is, most of the listeners are young women, and their age, young girls actually, they're teens. But unfortunately it only works for 2 hours, I think 4 to 6 in the evening. But that is a model, if it is really developed, I think that will work well. And I really look at most of the NGOs who are working in this sector to become more creative in the way in which they can unite and integrate with the community, and especially the communities where traffic victims, when they go back, if they themselves can become the advocates for awareness. I think I'll end this with just one quote from Anne Voscom. She's one of the best-selling authors from New York Times, and she wrote a book called "A Dare to Live Fully Right Where You Are." And there she says that you're as free as you set others free. If you aren't freeing someone, you're still in bondage to something. There is nothing as freeing as setting others free. I think that.
Thank you, Mr. Ghosh. You've touched upon very, very crucial points as to what are the challenges that Bangladesh faces in terms of actually having to deal and actually evolve a social model to look at this for the rescued victims, and also the commitment of the government to have a RRI task force, and also the opening of relationship between the BSF and BGB. They have come together at a platform, and they are happy to negotiate and make the entire process of repatriation a little more demystified and simpler. And also something that I've never heard about the FM channel anywhere when I was reading about the best practices. I've heard about, I of course know that Bollywood opened up to One Life, Not for Sale, and many of the other Ricky Martin Foundation and many of the other Hollywoods and Bollywood which are making films, MTVs having dedicated talk shows about anti-human trafficking. But FM channel for the young girls at Norail for 4 to 6 p.m. for 2 hours, I think that goes a very long way to say that how, especially given that Bangladesh is predominantly a rural country, so it goes a long way to actually give this message deep down in the community. Thank you so much. Can I now call, I'll struggle again, Yan Mei from the International Organization Migration to say a few words on the best practices if she has a model to share. Thank you.
First of all, I would like to express my sincere thanks to Calcutta Mary Ward Social Center for inviting me to join this workshop. Actually, Calcutta is the place where I studied for 1 year, almost 1 year, 14 years ago. So I love to come to Calcutta. So thank you so much for that. And so my presentation, actually, I try to cover both good practices and national initiative, but in the interest of time, I will skip some of the slides regarding the national government initiative. So normally, actually Myanmar victims of trafficking, this is the root of victims of trafficking. Most of our victims, Myanmar victims, they are recruited by the brokers and sold for the forced labor, and especially in fishing industry, and in Thailand, and also in the boat of the coast of the Indonesia, Thailand, and Malaysia. And there are some victims also. Female victims are trafficked to China for the forced marriage. So Myanmar has prioritized this human trafficking initiative as one of the national agenda since 1997. So we have also, Myanmar is also one of the members of UN CTOC member country, and that anti-trafficking law in 2005 is quite back. So we have national mechanism, central body for trafficking in passing, led by the Ministry of Home Affairs, and under that we have 3 working groups on prevention and protection, and working group on legal framework and prosecution, and working group on repatriation and rehabilitation. So actually, for the prevention, the focal department is the anti-trafficking in person division, and the protection is the focal is the Department of Social Welfare. This is just to let you know the structure of Myanmar. And okay, skip. So responding to challenges, we focus on 4 P's: prevention, protection, prosecution, and partnership. So victim-centered approach in all spheres, including investigation, is also carefully conducted. Please. So prevention, we can do the raising awareness. So through many ways, educating the community, through community-based dialogue, and we also have watch group form, and so to let the people, potential migrant knows what are the channels they can go through safely, and if they choose to migrate through irregular way, then what are the risks they will suffer. So we do this awareness raising program. Also, we also have training programs to the law enforcement officials to let them know the victims are the primary sources for the information they need. So they shouldn't treat the victim as a criminal. So we also have training program. And also research, but not much in progress, but research is also important. Through data collection analysis, we will know the trends of victims of trafficking, and then we can make the policy, proper policy to prevent trafficking. So protection comes once the victims once you are in touch with the beneficiary, and then we need immediate support, including shelter, food, and any psychosocial support before you identify the victim. So we also support this. I will not read. Provide this support and the protection. As IOM, we don't do much involved in the prosecution part, but we are always provide technical support to the government when they need technical support for law amendment or review and this type of process. So partnership is also important. We cannot do alone. No organization can do alone to combat trafficking. So we carefully focus on the partnership. So these are the whenever we have policy making program like developing the national plan of action, then we have to go through consultative process, so that everyone can discuss, and all the grassroots level suggestions can also be incorporated when we make the national level plan of action in combating trafficking in person. So we also have regional cooperation member of ASEAN through ASEAN and COMIT, and also like bilateral. We have bilateral agreement with Thailand and bilateral agreement with China to protect the victims of trafficking. So even we have ASEAN, we are the ASEAN member of ASEAN. We ratify ASEAN Convention that we need to have a bilateral agreement to make more effective this agreement. So this is just I like to share as a good model what IOM and government did for prevention of activity. So I would like to just show how we process for conducting public information campaign. So we conduct in two states, Kachin and Rakhine, for public information campaign. So so before we conduct the information campaign, we organize the media workshop. It's first of all with CSO. So we conduct please. Yes. So we have consultation, initial consultation with civil society organization, and then we content and media workshop, and we discussed about the messages, which messages we are going to give the public, media, which type of media we should use, method, activity, and for information campaign. And then this is the way we made the conservation. And in the media workshop, the CSO, including the religious leader, discuss to compose the sound. So what type of messages through sound? Because people in Myanmar, they left this sound, through the sound. If the message goes through the sound, they remember always. And this is for the poster. What type of messages we did a lot of poster we should include. And then this is the radio drama discussion, and through discussion we write the script for radio drama. So this is about street performance, and they are very good in thinking about how to create a street drama, street performance. All are very young, and they have innovative thinking, and they have we just share the understanding of human trafficking and migrant smuggling before we start the consultation. So they know the concept of the trafficking, smuggling. So they have the experience around them with the difficulties facing about BOT. So they incorporate all these messages, and then we do what. So yes. So after discussion with the CSU, then we bring the government together with the CSU. So we again have another workshop, government and all CSU together. So this is another workshop. We again organize together with the government and CSO for to finalize the project what we developed during the workshop with CSO. Next. So this time government suggests for what's the draft materials we developed in CSO, and then they also look at, and then they suggest what normally from their side it's carefully what is in line with the existing laws, the numbers mentioned, hotline numbers are correct or not, so they check, and then so we finalized, and most of the CSOs earlier they did not have chance to talk to the government. Now we through this workshop, because we made that as a bridge, and CSO and government, so they can now freely speak, and their cooperation can be strengthened. Okay. Then we developed. Then we developed like this type of pamphlet, document, and it's okay. So this is the pamphlet we developed. Please speak. And then poster. Next. Excuse me. And this is the vehicles. These are the projects of our media workshop. So we also developed a design for vehicles, and then we post. Okay. Please. Next. So, and after that we have a public information campaign. We conduct public information campaign with them, and so I don't have enough. I think it's finished. Time already, but just to show. So this is the information campaign we conduct with the youth. So, but the question we have done this as a sample, but now the sustainability. Who will take the responsibility to continue this type of? But this is also a challenge. But thank you.
Thank you, Yanma. I hope I've got it right. Yanma?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much for sharing the story. I was very interested whenever it was from Myanmar and Rakhine State. I was very interested and triggered to ask her questions about Rohingyas. But she mentioned that she's only going to talk about the trafficking aspect. We've seen some of the phenomenal things apart from the programs that I think it's just similar to for all the governments. What is most important is that they are addressing a behavioral communication strategy, which is very important in terms of actually doing these kits, doing these workshops, putting the whole communication down in the community with the spots in the radio drama. These have actually proved to be extremely, they have been very successful in changing perspectives and changing the behavior and approach and attitudes and understanding towards the subject, which is human trafficking. And I think I need to congratulate you for the phenomenal work that you're doing in actually having and loosening up a lot of relationships with the stakeholders, with the police, and also the bilateral agreement. It's very hard to put a bilateral agreement. You've done that with China and Thailand, so very good work. She's put a very important missing link in our whole anti-human trafficking drive that we've been talking about, prevention, protection and prosecution, and she has finally put the missing link of doing it with partnership. Without partnership, without a collective and a collaboration effort, it is not possible. Thank you for bringing that in. I would have summed it up anyhow. So, any questions for Yanma? I have not been having any questions from the audience. Either everybody is stiff-bored or else, which means that everything is so much in sync that there is no reason to ask questions, which is what? I think the panelists will also feel very encouraged and motivated to have some questions from you all. Any questions, please?
Perhaps a few things to highlight in her presentation, which I thought maybe is very important for the audience to know. She's talked about the awareness raising, what we have done, and for me, I think that's a very big achievement, and perhaps the entire, all of us who are here to, like a take home for us. When we joined, we started this initiative the last 2 years in Myanmar. It was a bit challenging, as you know very well, the history in Myanmar. The CSO's presence was a bit restricted. Nobody was allowed to do anything as far as responding to all these issues concerned. But with the changes now currently happening, we started with all this advocacy, engaging the government to know the importance or the role played by the CSOs, and also going to the CSO, let them know that they have a role to play. And first of all, referring to Rakhine, which has been a very big issue, where there's even sensitivities of the CSOs engaged in anything as far as trafficking is concerned. But when we came to them and wanted to hear from them, what do they have to contribute? What do they think are the challenges that are facing them? And this doesn't only affect them as Rakhine ethnic, but also it affects the other group as well, the Muslim communities in Rakhine. And when they realize that human trafficking or irregular migration does not affect only one community, it affects all of them. So they came in to participate and contribute very well and look at their needs on the ground, have the ownership, make all these innovative approaches, and came up with very interesting messages. On the songs she talked about, the songs that they produced in Rakhine became the leading song that are sung everywhere. The monks taking initiative talk about human trafficking. For me, it was a very big challenge, to be able to initiate and look at trafficking issues in Rakhine, sensitive a conflict setting, in northern Shan, Kachin area, again conflict setting, but seeing everybody come on board and appreciate that this is a problem that they have to address. It was a significant achievement, and in the long run, changing people's attitudes and behavior.
Thank you so much, and that is where we see how music becomes a mass movement. Thank you so much. I think this is really a big success. I extremely admire that movement that you have started. And with the songs, with the music, you can bring in a lot of shifts which otherwise the dry programs can never achieve. So we've had, if there are no questions, I will just wrap this up.
this use of creative ways of communicating, drawing on people's own talent and drawing on what's locally known or available, is something that's very exciting. Absolutely. It has been tried in other types of programs. I'm not quite sure how much it's been tried in relation to trafficking in any of our countries. But wherever it has, I would recommend that we consider, is it possible to make this as a major recommendation from this session?
Absolutely.
Also, it has come up in a couple of other sessions. I know I've been in two in which it has come up, but not in so much detail.
Yes. So
therefore, I would really ask, can we bring it to the plenary as a major recommendation?
Absolutely.
Creative communication, because then you need the creative communicators, because we are not those people. But we need them. That's a new partnership. Who are the creative communicators? The drama people, the folklorists, the singers, the performers, actors,
the street theatres.
Can we really, not just street theatres, but you take this out to the countryside?
Right. So we are
draw on their talent. Can we bring this as a major recommendation?
Absolutely.
So the Yena program in Ethiopia was apparently a brainchild of Girl Effect. In fact, this is a Nike foundation, and Nike has been working very hard with Ethiopians, mainly because of the long distance running. And when they came to Ethiopia in those very remote areas in Gondar region, they decided that they found the early marriage and in that area was a big problem actually. And girls were getting married at 15, 14, in the teens, and that's when the Nike Foundation concentrated, set up this FM channel dedicated for that particular region, area, and then they brought in a lot of these stars into the program, which obviously gave the program a kick. And that's how the marriage went up. And apparently the outcome success was that the child marriage is now almost obsolete, I mean not non-existent in that area. So that's been a very desirable outcome from this program.
Add on to what is Mr. Ghosh has stated. In the state of West Bengal, I see in my deliberation I have stated that it's not possible to change the world, but we can change ourselves, we can change our locality, we can change our village. In the state of West Bengal, I am quite clever, and I can say confidently, there are villages and hamlets which is 100% child trafficking free, which is 100% child labor free, which is 100% child marriage free. And one of the model I still remember being implemented in collaboration with police were theatre of the oppressed. A model, the pioneer was August Ball, where the theatre mechanism is not giving any kind of solution. Actor and spectator coming as spectator, where they are throwing the solution, a problem in front of the panchayat leader, in front of the police authority, and they themselves participating in the drama, become a character and throwing solution. I can see Ananya from banglanatok.com. I think they are doing a lot of good work. Yeah, so I think in such an international seminar, I need to highlight all these examples. And it is possible. There are rays of hope.
So, Ananya, would you like to say a few words, because Ananya, representing as director of banglanatok.com, I worked with her in my UNICEF days, and I've seen how these small little community skits, how they go a long way when we were addressing maternal mortality and other things, how these skits go a long way to change the behavior and makes those shifts in the attitudes of the village people who otherwise are not exposed to understanding the graphs and all that we say.
Thank you. I'll just say two lines. One is that, it's very important and it's very effective, as all of us have done it. But it's very important to train the folk artists, because often what happens, we have seen again in our work, that we think songs and dances are good, and we perhaps invite a dance group like a chauti, which is a vigorous, vibrant dance. to talk. So it becomes like a performance with sporadic messages. So that does not work. So the message has to be woven in the song, woven in the performance. So we need to train them and basically make them our spokesperson or everyone's spokesperson. The other is developing youth agency, training young people in using art. That works very well. So many of you shared that but did not explicitly mention that developing youth agency, I think that's very critical, and training them in communication.
Just maybe to her concerns plus what Ms. Ismail just mentioned, in terms of training and getting, sometimes we tend to bring those, well, it's very good to bring those goodwill ambassadors, people who are famous artists. However, that is not, I think, in the end results are not so good. Not what I mean. But when, yeah, exactly, I'm trying to clarify. Like again, coming back to our model, what we did, we started with like common people, the very young youth, who had absolutely no idea on what trafficking is and what they should do as far as responding to that, because they had no idea about it. Now, we had a series of consultations with them, try to understand what human trafficking is. From the simple terms, to look around in their communities, how does it feel like, or what it is, first of all from migration, then looking at irregular migration, if they were experiencing this in their communities, and what they thought they could do to respond to those challenges. Now, through this series of consultations, then they were like thinking, we had like a 10 days session through all that, and we were saying, okay, who would like to start to come up with some messages on posters and what they would like to hear their communities to understand. Then others were saying, oh, actually, I like singing, so what kind of song should I come up with? And then street performance is just performing without saying words, but just using action. And it was very, very tremendous to see how creative the youth can be. And not just the youth, a common villager, somebody who had no idea what trafficking is all about, what migration is all about. They came up with very, very interesting messages, and eventually went on to other communities to train their fellow youth. And then they became the ambassadors. And not just, and from zero knowledge up to where they went on and communicate. Some of the youth were actually selected to go for these commit summits and to train even other fellow youth. Now again, coming to, somebody mentioned about Ethiopia. We actually had a chance to use the same, actually the approach in Myanmar came from Ethiopia, because in Ethiopia we engage the communities. And we had what we call community dialogues, community conversations, where we engage the community to talk about what is surrounding them, what is affecting them. Then they come up with very nice messages again. And then they had these monthly meetings, dialogue, when we talk about migration, and eventually government took the ownership and made accountable the respective task force members on trafficking to report. So it was a way, first of all, the community took the ownership, then the government took it on to ensure sustainability, and eventually they kept on reporting. And every year there was all the states came together and be able to report how they have achieved in terms of combating human trafficking. And now there's an evaluation, and they see significant improvement in terms of reduction of numbers of trafficking and regular migration. Thank you.
I don't know if this has come up, but you know, a lot of times in many, I should say, yes, in many parts of the world, with this children, especially boys, being abducted, radicalized, they use that term. And it's been noticed that sports, teach them sports, whether it's like in Kashmir, I believe football works, cricket works, and in addition to cultural activities, I think sports is another way.
Yes.
Of, especially for children.
Absolutely.
And and also to get them engaged, so that they don't have too much of free time to indulge in anti-social activities, and then to get back, like now in I've been reading about Kashmir, these stone pelters, they're not going to be prosecuted, they're going to be decided, because they're all just normal boys who've just been misguided. So, there was this footballer who suddenly gave up everything and to join one terrorist outfit. Yeah. So, that's also a form of human trafficking. And sports, I think, is a very good way, especially for boys.
Thank you, madam, for bringing that up. Yes, we've used sports for FIFA and we've used Bend It Like Beckham and things like that, but then that was for the girls' multiplier effect. But then since you brought the topic of having boys, and since we are talking about human trafficking, there is this CATW, which is a coalition against trafficking in women, and there's this A21, you can look it up, where the men have been, or the boys, actually there's a curriculum that they run for the boys saying that it's a way of sensitizing them to see that the demand is lowered, because finally when we are looking at the trafficking aspect on two sides of the spectrum, the supply is happening because there is a demand. So they're looking at tackling the demand by sensitizing the boys, the adolescent, and also men. There are programs which says that men don't buy girls. Real men don't buy girls. So there are programs in the CATW which they are running in Philippines, and I think it's also coming in India. And there is also an A21 where they're looking at boys and running the curriculum to sensitize them, to take them through the journey as to what happens to somebody of his age when they are prostituted and the kind of trauma that they go through, so that in a way, in a surrogacy way, they reduce the demand. So there are many ways these things are happening, but then of course the sports being like one of the ways that you burn yourself up, and therefore you don't channel your interest in other areas. So that's the obvious way. So thank you so much. That's a very, very important point. We have Mr. Virat Kohli now also coming into the anti-human trafficking initiative. He's got a foundation by which he is kind of pledging to, make more responsive commitment towards anti-human trafficking. So we wrap up now. We've had a very, very interesting session which started with a political academician who put the entire perspective as to how anti-human trafficking should be looked at. We had somebody who talked about the best practices, Shotokopal De, who talked about the best practices and the commitment of the West Bengal government through Konyashree to having a dedicated directorate to look at child trafficking as one of the focus. We had from Cambodia, Sapui, who's talked about the role of the private sector and the social models. Mr. Shamunto, who talked about the women empowerment through Loho Manobi, putting it right in the center and demystifying the entire process by saying that women can also have an active relationship in asking for justice and all the entitlements through the law enforcement as well as through the library. And of course we had the very dominant role of the media as well as for the community communication. So with this, ladies and gentlemen, we've reached the tipping point of this panel discussion, and soon we will be going for the closing ceremony as well. But we will be, let's build this momentum and energy and take it from here, that because there are many girls and many boys who are still very unsafe and who still needs to be guarded, and we are just representing them. So I leave this panel now, and I thank all my panel speakers. I thank the audience for your exchanges, for your inputs, for your comments, and for your participation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharburi, for chairing the session. And before we go for the valedictory session, we would like to complete the formalities of this session, and we will be felicitating Ms. Sharburi Das of Justice and Care for chairing the session, and she will be felicitated by Sister Italy. And I will now request Sharburi Das to felicitate the speakers of this session, Dr. Bulbul Kaur James, Mr. Dev Ghosh, Mr. Shotogopal De, Ms. Supuri Liu. And Ms. Xiu Yin Mar Sok.